Wait, but I don't want to. I don't want to. I don't want to waste our valuable time. That's if we can,
Okay.
if can we pick up where we left off last time in the sugya itself?
Yes. Okay. So, first of all, I'd like to welcome everyone to our class on plummeting the depths of Torah. Just as a brief overview, very, very brief, what we did was we explained that the Torah, the Kodesh Baruch Hu compressed all this information into the words of the Torah, and it's our job to decompress the information so it in all its details. That's all it's about. He wants us to do certain things, 613 mitzvahs, and we have to learn how to do them properly, and excuse me, how to do them properly. And the way that we do that is to learn properly. So where we left off is we said what we're going to do in our class is we're going to go down 6 levels of decompressing material. Okay. And first we're just going to do it in a very brief way, and then we're going to go back and do everything in a very deep way. So basically we start with the Torah, and the Torah said that when a man, whose animal eats another man's field or tramples on it, then the person whose animal it is has to pay the victim with the best of his field. That's what it says. Then we have to mention the Mishnah. We didn't even see the Mishnah yet, but I mean together. But the Mishnah says that there's 4 types of damages, and they all share this quality of having that the damager has to pay the damagee with the best of his field. Okay, now we were holding in this part in the Talmud, in the Gemara. Let's go over there and see where we're holding. Now we did. Okay. Okay, we did was we showed how this law of paying with the best of your field, which starts in a local case of damaging another person's field with his by sending his animal or not properly guarding his animal. That's a local case. How that spread to all the different types of nezikin. Okay. So that's what we did. We know how to did it through these 4 words of Tachnasin Shalom Kes. Okay, now here's where we left off. The Ramchal gives us a very important key, a beginning key. Why do I say beginning? Because, of course, he wrote a whole book about this. But these 7 principles are very, very important. The Ramchal gives us labels to say, whenever you deal with a Gemara, it has to be one of these 7. Any statement that you see in front of you has to be one of these 7, serve one of these 7 functions. What is the 7 functions? So we said it's either a memra, it's a beginning statement, okay, like it says Arba Avos Nezikin, or it's a question, okay. Why did are the toldos of the avos like the avs or not? It's a question. Or it's going to respond to a question, that's called a tshuva, or the statement is coming to show that someone's statement is false, that's called a stira, to prove him wrong, or number 5, to prove himself or someone else correct. And finally, 6 and 7 is the kash and the teretz. He's not trying to prove anyone wrong, he's saying this statement has something difficult to understand in it. Okay, meaning that there's a contradiction somewhere. Not just that it's the word, if it's just a simple word, it's a shayla. What does the word mava mean? But here, a difficulty in understanding means that there's some conflict. You know, for instance, if you start off with the term mava and you end up with the term aish, you switch your terms. So that's difficult to understand why the Tana switched his terms. Okay, the teretz explains that difficulty. Okay, so basically, if you look at it, you can even make less categories. You see, I don't do it because the Ramchal didn't do it, but if you analyze what he has to say,
Yeah, want to go play in the other room? Can you go? You guys want to go play there? Just go to the other room so it'll be quiet. Huh? What?
I thought that we're looking at a video.
Oh, I am. Sorry.
okay, it's part of life. If you analyze this carefully, you see the tshuva is a response to a shayla, right? And the teretz is a response to a kasha. Okay, you can't have a teretz before you have a kasha. You can't have a tshuva before you have a shayla. Okay, now so basically I break things down into black, reds, and greens. Black, reds, and greens. Okay, there's three different things happening. A black means you're making a statement. Okay, a red means you're either asking a question because there's something that's not clear, or you're raising a contradiction, a kasha, or you're saying that this statement is false. But those to me are all reds. Okay, greens means that you're answering a question, or you're solving a problem, mataras akusha, or you're bringing a proof. So basically, when I do this type of outlining, I basically break it down even easier to just black, which is an original statement, and then you have reds, which are going to stop you, and greens, which are going to have you go. Okay, but be that it as may, these seven things, labels. Well, with these labels, the Ramchal tells us you're able to analyze any Shaklavatara, any debate in the Gemara. Okay, very powerful tool. That's why I said to you before. I mean, I couldn't have done this. I wish I could. I couldn't have. There's no way that I could have come up with these seven principles. Maybe in 3,000 years or 2,000, but Chaim Shulchan can't. But the fact that the Ramchal did is a tremendous tool to help us in analyzation. And as I mentioned to you last time, I have a relative who teaches in Cheder, Yeshiva Katana, and the Rosh Yeshiva goes away 2 weeks to collect money, and I showed him these seven principles, and I told him, just ask the kids now in the sugya that you're learning to label what's going on. Well, after 2 weeks, the kids said, we never learned Gemara like that. Why? Because for the first time, again, they're handling the text. Instead of handling... Well, Yeshiva Katana was 13, 14, 15 years old. Yeah. Because the method is, again, more of a... an assimilation method, If you're around long enough, you're going to get the idea. Okay, some people do get the idea, and a lot of people don't get the idea, or they think they got the idea and they got the wrong idea. So the Ramchal has given us these tools to label what's going on, and it's a fantastic thing. Now I know consciously what to do. I remember Rabbi Goldstein used to say, someone used to raise his hand and say something. He says, now what exactly do you want? I mean, do you have a question, or are you raising some objection, or maybe you just want attention? You know what I mean? So, and it used to frustrate me so much that unfortunately a lot of the stuff that was going on was attention now, and not about learning. And it's important to Makarov people, don't get me wrong, but the learning system is learning is learning, and Musa Shmuz is a Musa Shmuz. So with these, and this is all Rabbi Goldstein told me to get. Again, I didn't know where these books were. He told it to me. He got it from Rabbi Davis. But once you see the power of the Ramchal, then you're able to begin consciously. So we took this we were doing this last week when we were together. Now we'll go over it together. Now what I did with Avi is I have a little tool. Okay, I won't do it now. I don't waste the time. But basically, I made a little program with the seven functions. Okay, and on the other side you have a Gemara, and then all you have to do is drag and drop the functions over to the statements. Okay, fun and games. But what it really does is make you concentrate on what's going on. Okay, So here, this is what we're doing last week, right? And the reason why we're doing this piece here is because this is the Gemara in Bava Kama that speaks about Meitav, okay? But it's not the whole Gemara, because again, what I'm trying to do here is give you an overview first, and then we have to go in together in each step and slowly analyze each step and see what the new addition is to our understanding as we go down the levels. Okay, so right now this is the end of a Gemara, but it's a key to understanding this overview. Okay, so we said like this: the Gemara says Rami le Abaya Rava. Okay, Rami is a difficulty because you're going to throw one pasuk against another one, and you're going to show a contradiction. And as we said last week, Hashem doesn't have contradictions. So if, as they say, imrekhem mechem hem, if it's empty, then the emptiness is yours. You just missed the point, okay? So that's from Dr. Gemara. Again, these principles must be learned. Someone has to teach these books. I mean, wow, you know. Again, what bothers me, that the books are there, and no one is looking at them. Everyone wants to do it ad hoc through an assimilation method. Why not use the books? They're all there. I didn't write the book. So that's it. Many people don't understand that, you know, that simple rule, that if you see something in Torah that doesn't make sense, you're supposed to say, this doesn't make sense. And then you're supposed to figure out, well, how it does make sense. You're not supposed to just accept it. You're supposed to ask. And then when you ask, then you get into a deeper level of the real message behind the words. But if you don't ask and you just read, then you don't go very far. And you get very strange ideas, like Hashem has a hand, because it says he put a hand in Mitzrayim. Okay, Ramile, Abaya. Okay, Abaya looked at the Chumash, like we should be doing. He said, wait a minute, it seems that there's two Pesukim that are contradictory. They crash into each other. What do we say? Pesukim in collision. Why? Because when it came to this sending in the shore to another man's field and damaging the field, the Torah said, Meitav Sedeu Meitav Karma Yishalem. Correct? Fine. So let's make an inference. Meitav in midyachrin alo. You have to give the best of your field, and you can't give anything else. No, that's what it says. Now all of a sudden we have a brisa that says that when the Torah talks about bor, I should have shut that off. It's to rest my eyes. When the Torah talks about bor, it says when an ox falls into a pit, okay, the owner of the pit has to Yishalem Kesev Yoshiv L'Ba'alav. Well, he can use money. That's wonderful. And also, he can return. Well, why did they say Yishalem Kesev L'Ba'alav? He should pay money for this. Why say Yishalem Kesev Yoshiv L'Ba'alav? So that's another flag word. Whenever we see an extra word, again, all these things have to be, if you read the Darkei Gemara, you'll know a list of things to look out. And one of the things you look out for is if the Torah could have said something in 3 words, and it says it in 4. If it said something in 2 words and it says it in 3, if there's an extra word, it's a flag that there's new information. So here it should have just said that you Yishalem Kesev L'Ba'alav. That's simple Hebrew. You pay the money to the owner of the animal that you just killed. But it doesn't say that. It says Kesev Yoshiv. So there we have a flag word, and the Brisa tells us that this extra word means kol minei shavius. Not only can you give Kesev, but you can give anything that's worth Kesev. Okay? Now, excuse me. Okay, now we have a conflict here. Because you told me I have to pay. And remember, we said through that Gezerah Shava that all these payments are now are equal. You can, anytime you damage, you have a tzad shava that you can pay with the best of your land, and also with kesef, and also with shava kesef. But there's a contradiction. Why? Let me ask you a question. The Torah says you have to pay with the best of your land. That means you can't pay with the medium land and the worst, correct?
Right.
Okay. Now, is that land worth money? The medium land. Is it worth money? Sure, it's worth money. So if it's worth money, it's called shaveh kesef, correct? It's called an item that's worth money, right?
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
Now, it's not the best item, the best of your land, but it is worth money. And we just found out from this other pasuk that it says, kesef, you can give money, yashiv labal, any type of equivalent of money. So how come, when it comes to land, I can't give the medium and the worst? The other pasuk said, anything that has money I can give. You hear the contradiction?
I guess, but yeah, I do. We talked about this last time, how the best portion of the land is important because the neighbors are going to be interested in buying this piece of real estate, and that's why you have to give them the best, not the worst. Something I meant to ask last time is there seems to be an assumption here that all land is of equal value according to square footage or square meters. But wouldn't we say, wouldn't there be some kind of sliding scale in a modern economic system? You'd say, well, okay, I'm questioning this word shaveh. Like I would say, okay, the best part of my land, I'd sell you for $1,000 per square meter. But the mediocre part of my land, I'd sell you for $500 per square meter.
That's correct. So now I'm going to address myself to your question. The first question is, how much damage did you do to the victim, let's say? Give me a figure.
Right, so let's say $1,000.
$1,000 of damage. So now you're going to have to pay $1,000 of damage. What's the difference between paying $1,000 worth of damage from your best land or from your worst land? What's the difference?
Well, keeping in mind, this is my question here though, keeping in mind that I'd be selling him, if my best land is, I don't know, 10 square meters per $1,000,
right.
So I could say to the person, look, I'm not going to give you my best land, I'm going to give you my mediocre land, but I'm giving you 20 square meters.
Exactly. Right on the ball.
So what's the problem with that?
Exactly. What's the problem with that? That is the question. What is the problem with that?
I mean,
you're not shortchanging him, right? You're not shortchanging him. He's going to get more land because he's getting the medium or worse quality. The worse it goes down, the more land he's going to get. In the end, that land is going to be worth $1,000. The only difference is the amount of land that will change. Correct?
Right.
So what's wrong with giving him the medium or the worst? That's exactly the question. It says...
Last time...
Yeah, go ahead.
If I remember correctly, you said last time it has to do with the fact that neighbors are interested in land that is closer to... Well, actually, I don't remember, to tell you the truth. I don't remember what was the criterion?
Oh, now you're talking. You see, now you're talking. This is what you have to discuss. We have to understand what was the criterion that the Torah is using to make this distinction. That's a question on the floor. That's a very serious question. And we're going to have 4 different criterion. But that's what's on the floor. You understand? That's what's so beautiful about it. You see that the Torah is making a distinction which doesn't make any sense. Because on the one hand, you can give kesef or anything that's equal to money. Well, medium and bad land is also equal to money. So why is this distinction being made? What is we call a factor? My timer. What's the reason for this distinction? This is the very serious question that's on the floor. A very serious question. So serious that Abaya asked it to Rava, and it's been recorded for around, a little less than 2,000 years for every Jewish student to ponder. And it's something that you should have seen. Right? It's not lo b'shamayim hi. Lo b'shamayim hi. But in order to see it, you first had to understand, look at the steps that we went through. You had to understand, well, first you have to read the Chumash, and you have to see that the Chumash says Meitav, right? Then you have to see that the din of Meitav spreads through all the Nezikin, through Takan Sini Shalom Kesef, the Gzeir Shava. Then you have to see that there's a contradiction between that and Shava Kesef. Now, once you put all those things together, it's very clear that there's a collision of Pesukim here. The question is, how do you solve the problem? The proper way to learn is try it yourself. Make a distinction. That's the proper way to learn. Then you look at the distinctions that are being made. And if the distinctions that are being made are different than yours, you say, well, what was wrong with mine? And what's right with theirs? And that is called conscious and responsible learning. And that's what it's all about. That's why it does take a mature mind. And a lot of people, now I won't say a lot, I hate to use the word because I don't take statistics, but people, because there's 3,000 pages of Gemara and there's so much information, race through these things and never carefully consider what's at stake. And that's a chaval. That's why they don't get the beauty of learning, because it's just memorizing the Manhattan telephone book, which is very nice for certain people that have very nice memories and are very quick and fast. And I'm not, that's very nice. But these people that we're talking about, Abaye and Rava, are very, very serious people. 5,000 lines of code in Word doesn't interest them. They have 5,000 lines of code in Gemara, in Chumash. That's where their code is happening. But they're very deep people. And they're asking, the beauty of it is, once you see what they're saying, you can understand it too. Lo b'shamayim hi. Everyone should be learning this way. What can I tell you? That's what I feel. And because they're not, then then they say, well, my own father, Olav Shalom, he said, yeah, I went to, at the Cheder, and one person said this, and one person said this, and one person said this. That's what he got out of it.
Right.
Chabal. So anyway, that's the question now. There's a collision of Pesukim here. Okay? So now, that's called a kasha. That means it's difficult to explain how this verse jives with the other verse. It seems to be contradictory. So now we're going to give 1, 2, 3, 4 different terutzim to that question. Okay? And what I did was I skipped through this because, again, this Gemara, notice, as I told you on the side here, I break the Gemara into parts. I don't do anything. I love the Gemara. I want it to talk to me. So I just break it into parts, and I say, look, when there's difficulty raised, so it's raised on a statement, and then I know I'm expecting a teretz, and sometimes the teretz is a stira. Sometimes the Gemara says, goodbye, Charlie. We can't accept your answer. We're going to soter your answer. We want to show what's wrong. Okay, so that's what happens with answer 1, by his own answer, and Rava then gives another answer. And here we were with answer number 5. Okay, now as I said, we're going to Be'ezus Hashem. This is what I want to do, because if I don't do this, then what did you gain? You know what I mean? Just to hear some nice little drush and a word of Torah, and get excited. We're not talking about that. This is a very serious scientific study, and it's open to everybody. You just have to be presented properly. That's all. Anyway, we're going to go through all these stages. Believe me, as I said, we're going to analyze the Gemara. We're going to analyze the Mishnah. We're going to do everything. It's going to take time, but in the end, there'll be clarity. And once you have the clarity here, I told you. Now start flying, go through all of Shas, but do it recognizing what you're dealing with. You're dealing with diamonds, not custom jewelry here. Okay, Rav Huna Omer. So now, there's a big, if you notice, there's 3 dots over here. Okay, what does that mean?
Are we
Yeah.
are we not going to go through all the tirutzim?
No,
You want to just
because I want to save that for later. My program with you is a long-term program. If you want to participate, you have to go, step by step through the process. So first, what I like to do is to give an overview, and then we have to go back and we have to go through each step and see how the pieces were formed and created and what was done in each step. Okay, but right now my aim is not to teach you the sugya. If it was, I would have started in the beginning. But that's we will be doing. Okay, I'm going to give you, once you understand how to use these 7 principles, then I'll give you the text. You have Microsoft Word, right? And you can go do what I'm doing. Okay, it may not look as beautiful, but you didn't work on it for hours. But once, I mean, what am I doing? I just added indents and I added some numbering, which is pretty easy to do in the Word nowadays. Okay, not important. So that was my long explanation why we're going to skip this whole Gemara, okay? I'm going to go down to the end over here. Now, these 3 dots means that there's a whole page and a half. That's where the Gemara switches the topic, okay? Why, when, how is a very interesting study, which we'll have to do at a later time. Then at the end of this quote-unquote diversion or tangential move, which is also not tangential, of course, we're going to call it tangential, it comes back with a statement of Rav Huna. And Rav Huna says the following. Rav Huna says the following. He makes a statement. It has nothing to do with what the Gemara just discussed. He says, O Kesiv, O Meitav. What does that mean?
either one.
That's right, A or B. You can either use Kesiv to pay for your damage or Meitav. Okay? Esavei Rav Nachman LeRav Huna. Well, what's an Esavei? It's a kasha, right? Because the statement of Rav Huna now is going to be under attack. We're not going to prove him wrong, but we're going to say, wait a minute, what you're saying is contradictory to another statement. What's the contradiction? Esavei Rav Nachman. Remember the statement that said Yashiv, that extra word of bor? What did the Brisa tell us it means? L'rabba Subin. So we say you can only pay with Kesiv or Meitav when we have a Brisa that says the extra word in the pasuk comes to tell me I could use any type of Shava Kesiv.
It's just the same
Clear?
problem we stated, no? Isn't it just
Now,
it's returned to the beginning, the same problem.
Oh, now, what you're saying now is a very deep discussion in the Rishonim, the next level. Is he just restating what we learned before in different words, or is he saying something completely different? Okay, so l'chari, first look at it, well, he's just saying what everyone else is saying. Okay, well, first of all, what did Abaya say before? What was his rumia? What was his collision of Pesukim? Remember what it was?
Yeah.
What was it?
Yeah, Meitav Sadehu, Meitav Karmo Shalem.
Yeah.
What is that? Is that included Karmo or no?
Well, forget about karma. It's not important. I mean, it's another reason why they said karma. Not important. For our important thing, it says Meitav Sadehu. Okay?
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So what was the contradiction?
So the contradiction was that on the one hand it says that you have to pay with the best part of your field.
Mm-hmm.
It says the best part and not.
You must pay the best
part.
Exactly.
And then the colliding pasuk says no. Actually, from the word yashiv implies that we could pay with anything, including money or bran. In other words, anything that has any commercial value,
Right.
even the worst quality item.
Right. So again, if we focus on the elements of contradiction, the first pasuk says you have to give the best of your land, correct?
Yeah.
And you can't give the medium and the worst. But the second pasuk says you can give anything that has value. My medium and worst has value. Okay, as we said, you have to give more of it, but it has value. And not only can you give anything that has value, you can give the worst type of value. Subin. Subin is something like, fill up your house with stacks of bran. Who needs stacks of bran? But it's worth $1,000. The whole house is going to be filled with stacks of bran. You know what I mean? But that's what it says. Right? So when we focus on the two elements that are contradictory, by saying Meitav, it says, I can't use the medium and worst land. By saying Yoshev says, I certainly can. It has Shavios. In the aspect, in the bechina of worth, there's nothing wrong with medium and poor land. It also has worth. Correct? So Meitav eliminates medium and bad land, and Yoshev seems to take it in. Okay. Now, over here, Rav Huna does not exactly state that. He says, oh, I skipped this step. Too bad. Okay. I skipped a step. Okay. Anyway, I'll continue here and then I'll go back. Doesn't matter. I should have said this step first. It doesn't matter. This question of...
We could go to it.
Okay, I'll just get to this question now because we're here. I don't want to now unload the whole thing. Here, Rav Huna made a statement and he spoke about Kesef and Meitav. He said that Kesef and Meitav are alternatives, right? Now, does he have some sort of question? This is not a question. Kesef and Meitav, is that a contradiction? No, he says Kesef or Meitav. Our problem with Meitav was that it eliminated the middle and the worst land. Our problem with that was it said Yoshiv, which is even Shaveh Kesef. But Rav Huna is saying something totally, his message is something else. He's saying you can either use Kesef or Meitav. So l'chora, it has nothing to do with our question. Our question is between, let's say, bad land and Yoshiv and value. He's not making any statement about that. He's just talking about you can either give money or good land. It had nothing to do with that question. You with me?
In other words, wait, are you saying it's...
Yes.
Is this like a closed disjunctive? In other words, there is no third option. It's either silver or good land, but not barley, not chaff, or not mediocre land?
Excellent. What you just asked is a proper inference. That's the inference of Rav Nachman Bar Huna. He says, wait a minute, you just gave two possibilities. And you closed them off. You said either Kesef or Meitav. Wait a minute. Don't you know that the word Yoshiv means to include all Shaveh Kesef?
Right.
Exactly. You see, just by slowing down, reading the text, you yourself came to the next difficulty. Right? Beautiful. And that's what Rav Nachman says. Wait, everybody knows this brisa. The brisa says you can use Shaveh Kesef. So how come you only said Kesef and Meitav? There's a third possibility. Shaveh Kesef. How come you didn't mention it? Let's look at it.
I guess Kesef...
Yeah, go ahead, please.
I guess, just a logical inference. If you say Kesef, that it's just, I don't know, it's just reasonable that it implies anything of exchange value. So I guess if Rav Huna is saying, Kesef, when I say Kesef, I mean strictly Kesef. I don't mean any exchangeable good. I mean only this form of currency. Nothing else is a form of currency. Right, so I guess and the problem is, well, wait a minute, Rav Nachman said anything that could serve anything of exchange value whatsoever.
Yeah, that's a given, right? Exactly.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. So that's called a kasha. On the Rav Huna, right? You know, Rav Huna made memra. Now, here's another thing. Some people want to say this is Teretz 5, original kasha. We have to see how. Okay? But locally, you always have to look at the two the cases in their local environment and in their broad environment. Okay? So in the broad environment, people want to say this is a fifth answer to a biased question. In the local environment, we have Rav Huna making a statement and Rav Nachman saying to him, your statement is incorrect because there's a third possibility, which is asking a kasha. You with me? So there's a statement and a kasha locally. So Rav Huna answers him, Hacha b'mayaskinan b'deleslei. When can you give shav kesef, afilu subin, b'deleslei? When you don't have kesef or meitav. A whole new approach to the problem.
It's like a b'diavad.
It's a b'diavad payment.
Situation.
Right.
It's like, well, he's saying this, but I guess he's saying in the Hatchila, there's two forms of payment, but b'diavad, if you actually don't have either good land or silver, so then you could pay with anything.
Right. Right.
I mean, of course, you could go to the bank, if there is such a thing, and exchange your chaff for money. And then, I mean, I don't know if the responsibility would fall upon the payer. He said, look, you have to pay only with silver, so don't lug around big sacks of chaff. Go sell them to the local, farmer for silver, and then pay with silver.
You're right on target. Beautiful.
Why?
Because look what the Gemara is going to say. The Gemara is going to say, beautiful. You see, by just using your head and saying 2 and 2 is 4, you came up with the next question of the Gemara. Of course, not as sophisticated, but really it's the same question. The Gemara has a kasha. It says, the leslei peshita. So it says, wait a minute. If a person has nothing, if he has no money, and he doesn't have any good land, so of course he has to pay whatever he has. I mean, he does have to pay. I mean, if he had nothing, maybe we have to sell him for never divrei, where the whole pasuk started. Okay, fine. I don't know what the punishment is. But here, if he has something is better than nothing. So it's obvious that if he doesn't have kesef or meitav, he's going to have to pay with the medium and with the median land. So what does the Gemara say? Exactly what you said. No, it's a chiddush. We have to. This little scenario is very important to discuss. Mahu desema. What would you have thought? It's not peshita at all. You would have said amrinin lay. We say to the damager, the person who did the damage, zil tarach v'zavin v'aisei lay kesef. If I didn't have the pasuk telling me that I could use Shava Kesef, even bran, what would I have said? My friend, you have bran, you knock yourself out and go sell it and bring me money. The chiddush of the pasuk of Yashiv is no. The nizak, the person who was damaged, has to suffer the work of translating that bran into cash.
What's zavin? I know zil tarach. I guess would
zil go out.
Go and
torach.
Yeah, and bother.
Bother yourself, sweat and strain.
Careful.
Yes, zavin,
Yeah.
sell the bran. Va'aseh, and bring to me, lay it money.
Right.
So the Chiddush is that the Torah puts the responsibility to cash in the bran on the part of the victim. But that's only in the case if the perpetrator of the damage doesn't have kesef or meitav.
Right.
Okay?
This is the Chiddush of Rav Huna.
This is the Chiddush of Rav Huna.
In other words, I understand. In other words, when he says kesef or meitav, he is implying that it's the onus is on the recipient to exchange the barley or the bran for money.
No, he's saying lechatchila, if the aggressor, I don't know what are we going to call him, the mazik, the lechatchila, if he has money or the best, he has to give it as payment.
Right.
But if he doesn't have it, if he doesn't have money or the best of his land, then he can give anything else. And it's on the victim here to go and to sell it. That's the Chiddush.
Right.
That's the Chiddush. Because you might have thought, well, you have nothing else. So go and go sell it and get the land. You waste your time and sell it. The answer is no.
The kamash, is it kuth mem lamd is kamash malan?
Yes. Kor means the present tense. Mashma means we hear. Lan means us. We hear from this. What do we hear? We hear from the word yashiv that he can give shavyus b'di'evid, and he doesn't have to go and change it into money. Kor mashma, like kor is present tense. Mashma means I hear. Lan, us. It's coming for us to hear. This extra word of yashiv, that if you don't have kesef or meitav, then you can give the bran and you don't have to go out and cash it yourself. That's on the nizak to go cash it.
I see. Does kamash malan, does that always refer to this type of apparently superfluous word that actually has a word like yashiv that has an implication? Is that?
Yes. Now this is this move. I'm just going to move this over here. This move here is one of the essential moves in Darkei Gemara. Okay, this little, and I'm just going to again explain it to you. The rule is the Torah is not contradictory, and also the Torah doesn't say things that have no meaning. Which means if the Torah won't tell us the sky is blue, because we know the sky is blue. That's called svara chitzona. The Torah won't repeat something that it already said. Everything is necessary and sufficient. If we get to a pasuk, excuse me, that seems to be obvious, which means we would know it. Why would we know it? Through what we call an external source, either common sense or another verse. So we always ask Peshita, my kamash malan. Zil korei Ravu is the whole statement. Go out and ask the kids. In other words, this is obvious information. There's no need for it to be said. The answer to this difficulty is always to show why to show a chiddush, some new reason why it had to be said. Okay? So the step is, a statement is made. It seems to be superfluous. So we say, Peshita, my kamash malan. We say, no, this case is indeed telling us a very big chiddush, because we would have thought the opposite. And therefore, we need this case to be said. Okay, so the move is statement, Peshita, Mahu Desema, Kamash Malan. That's one of the basic processes of analysis that goes on in the Gemara. You'll see it very, very many times. Okay? So here, let's go through the steps. Rav Huna made a statement. that you have to give lechatchila kesev and meitav, and if you don't have it, you can give any other type of anything that has the equivalent of money. So the Gemara said, wait a minute, that seems to be obvious. Now, why is it obvious? Okay, we have to fill in that blank, you see. So I'm just going to fill in the blank. Well, because he has to pay, and he has to pay. If he doesn't have, so let him pay with what he does have. I mean, what is he not going to pay when he has something that's worth money? So that seems to be obvious. So now we show a big chiddush, because you might have thought that the Torah would tell the mazik to torech, to sweat and strain, sell his brand, and come back with money. Comes along the Torah, says no, the mazik doesn't have to do that. That's the Kamash Malan. That the mazik does not have to sweat and strain and bring the nizak money. He can just give him the brand. Okay? Now, the next question that's usually asked, or can be asked, is, Eino Hanami, if that's such a great chiddush, how do you know it's true? Okay. In other words, now we have, and this is another thing that people just often miss, there's a tension always in the Gemara between the Kasha and the Teretz. Nothing is simple. It's not, we don't talk about simple questions and answers. I know if I mention this, if you have, when your child asks you a question, so you give him a simple answer because he doesn't know very much and you just have to supply information. We're dealing here in the Gemara with a highly intellectual people. So there's a real reason to ask, to present the difficulty, and a matter of fact, the teretz always has to change something that we normally wouldn't have thought. There's always a tension between these two things. It's called the havamina and the maskana, or the kash and the teretz. There's always a tension, and a new principle develops between the tension of these two forces. Now, the work in iyun is to label and describe the forces involved. Okay, and then to understand why one force is indeed greater than the other force. But this is the deep meanings of what's going on in these Gemaras. It's not one person is smart, the other person is stupid, and he just gives them answers. There's a very powerful problem being raised, and the answer is going to tell us open up a new vista. Now, I give an example. I'll give you an example of this type of stuff in the simple world. For many years, people used to say that the sun goes around the world, right? Yeah. Why did they say that?
Well, based on unreflecting observation.
I would say, first of all, based on simple observation. Okay, you're right, unreflect, but it's very, very simple. I mean, that's what you see with your eyes. No reason to question it. So, Copernicus, who the Goyim had a big problem with their calendar, and they started getting people involved looking at the reality because their Masoras were all messed up about, when time in the calendars. I won't get into it, but anyway, that's how it all started. And he went and he looked at the old Greek books that he had around, and there's an old debate about this thing, which is right. Does the sun go around the earth goes around the sun? It's an old debate. It wasn't his chiddush. Anyway, he looked at the heavens, and he saw that there's one planet that does a very odd thing. All the other planets go according to what's called the ecliptic. In other words, if you draw a line from sunrise to sunset, all the planets follow that exact orbit, that exact line. That's why whenever you go to the planetarium, it's always the sun in the middle and all the planets are on the same plane, right? So from our perspective, wherever the sun travels, all the other planets travel too. It's fine. There was one crazy planet called Mars that didn't continue in the circle. In other words, it followed the track, but all of a sudden it backtracked and then went forward. All the other planets rose like the sun and set like the sun, whatever their timings were, but it was always rising and setting at the same time, and also in the same ecliptic, same path. Except all of a sudden Mars, which follows the path, does a back step and then goes forward. So this bothered people throughout the ages. And there was two different terutzim, right? Because again, we have a kasha and a teretz. If everyone's traveling one direction and you all of a sudden go back and forward, that's a contradiction. My timer, why you on what basis are you doing that? So there were a lot of terutzim based on the fact that the sun was right in the middle and that actually Mars was making a loop in the same plane and an epicycle, and it looks as if it was going backwards and forth, but just making another loop, and that's how they solved it.
Right.
Good. There came along Copernicus, and he said, I have a new way of solving it. But it's going to take making what our eyes see incorrect. It's going to take putting the sun in the center and we going around the sun. And then I can explain very simply why Mars, from our perspective, looks like it's going backwards and forwards. And such he did. Well, of course, it caused a revolution, blah, blah, blah. All that's history. But the problem, what I wanted to bring up is that there was a very good reason why people were going to, string them up on a tree. Because we see that the sun goes around the earth. That's what we see. Now, because you had a kasha on Mars, you were willing to change what our eyes see and make a whole new system of reality. Well, that was very revolutionary. And he had a whole mathematics behind it. Well, lo and behold, people have found out all this mathematics were based on false statistics, and it was a lot of malarkey. But it doesn't matter. It became popular, and people accepted it. So they accepted it. I'm not saying that it's not true. I mean, but I'm just trying to say that his proofs, i.e. the rayas that he had, were no rayas at all. But anyway, it was accepted because it did explain the anomaly of Mars, and people said, okay, we're going to accept that. And we won't get into all the ramifications. It's just an interesting story. What am I trying to bring up here with this long discussion? There's a reason why you make a statement that the sun goes around the earth. That's because that's what you see through observation. Now, you have a kasha with Mars, so you have two possibilities. You can keep your original premise that the sun goes around the earth and then modify the orbit of Mars to an epicycle. And you can solve your problem, keeping the premise that the sun goes around the earth. Or you can depart from the simple view of what your eyes see and explain the orbit of Mars by saying that the sun is in the middle, and what you're seeing is the smaller orbit of Mars in relationship to Earth, whatever. Actually, the larger orbit of Mars in relationship to Mars, no, before the smaller orbit. Okay, well, what am I trying to bring out here? That when a difficulty is raised, it has to be a powerful difficulty. And when it's solved, you're either going to change a major premise, or you're going to modify one of those premises. Now, whatever you do is going to have hashlachot, is going to have consequences. So there's going to be a debate upon which premises do you change. Okay, I hope that wasn't too long, but I just wanted to show that in life itself, we have this tension between two premises. We see a kasha, and now something has to change. The question, what is going to change? Okay, so here we have, again, we have this anomaly. We have a conflict between these two pasukim. Now, what are we going to change? So look what Rav Huna did. He said the tension between Shavik Kesef and Baininus and Ziboris, which is also worth Kesef, I'm going to change it by saying that the Torah, when it said Yashiv, was talking about B'diavad. That was his solution. Now, we'll have to discuss, and we will, what does he gain, what does he lose by that? Okay? What does he gain, what does he lose? Okay. Now, I just want to, I know it's probably late for you. You still have time, right? 10, 11:30. Do you have a little more time?
Yeah,
Or
yeah,
is it
sure.
getting too late? Okay, because I wanted to go back
No.
now. I want to go back now and and do the last terets of of Reb Papa and Reb Humberet Shua. Okay, that's what I skipped, unfortunately. Number 4. Okay, so in other words, we had the kasha of Abai and Rava. We had excuse me, the Abai asked Rava, right? Rava provided the first terets. Okay, if you remember, in and out of Basin. Okay, that was his terets, but it was destroyed by the stira, whatever it is. Abaya then gave his terets, sophisticated terets, and the Gemara knocked that one out too. Okay. Here's the stira. Okay. Then Rava came back with another answer, and the Gemara knocked that out also. So here we're in the 4th teret of Rav Papa. Okay, that's before this whole business of Rav Huna, which I didn't want to stop in the middle. Now, Abaya's question again: Baininess and Zibris has value, and yet we can't use it. Why? We can use any other type of items that have value. So when Rav Papa and Rav Humberet and Rav Yeshua came, they explained the distinction between the best of your land and Shavei Kesef. They said like this: Mile meitav. Really, everything is meitav. All things are meitav. All things are the best. Why? In what bechin? In what aspect are they the best? De'ilo mizdaben hacha mizdaben b'masa achrise. Because if they can't be sold here, they can be sold in another place. So what type of items we're talking about? We're talking about movable items. Movable items, if cannot be sold here, you'll find someone else down the street that will buy it. So all all movables he'll translate is called meitav, because since they're movable, you can always find a buyer. Labar, excluding land. Land is not called meitav. Why is it not called meitav? Why isn't all forms of land called meitav? Because if I don't have buyers in my vicinity, then the nizak will be stuck with the stuff. So land is not called meitav. Movables are always called meitav because although the nizak has to go around and get his money back, but at least he can do it because there's always a buyer somewhere. But with land, you're stuck to the limited people who are around you. Because of that, what we call the greusa, because of that negative quality in land, that you may not find a buyer, and therefore you won't be able to translate it into money, the Torah says, delay seitav, you have to give mi meitav, you have to give from the best of your land. Why? Ki heichi delichbotz aleha zvine, so that the few customers around will jump at it. Okay, is that clear what he says? Go ahead, please. Any words?
What's zvine?
Buyers.
Zvine.
Buyers.
I still don't
It's for the word
quite
zaven.
get why. See, it's the question I had before still bugging me.
Please.
Assuming that you have buyers around, and okay, we take it for granted that the number of buyers is limited when we're talking about real estate compared to the number of buyers when you're talking about movables. I mean, that's a given across the board. That's a given. Real estate, is going to have a limited market. Okay?
Right.
But given that limited market, why could I not sell more of a mediocre piece of land to the same customer to whom I would sell the finest piece of land? Because why would he be more interested in 10 square meters of the finest land than in 20 square meters of the mediocre land?
Tell me, please, why?
No, I don't know why. I don't think he would be. I think, on an economic basis, a purely economic consideration, he might say, well, you're right. I'm not getting the nicest piece of land. I'm not, getting Marat Machpelah maybe, but I'm getting a lot more land if I settle for lower quality. There's an inverse ratio between quality and quantity here, which is just natural, and I don't see why a customer would say, no.
Let's play the game with extremes, okay?
Yeah.
Okay. If I and also function, let's take the extremes. Let's say I live next to you and I'm a farmer and you're a farmer, right? And I have a field that says sodeh. We're talking about a sodeh. Okay. A sodeh means that I'm using it to produce fruits and vegetables, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I say to you, I'm the person who damaged you. I say, you know something? I want you to take this rocky land. I'll give you a lot of it, but you know how much you're going to have to work to get a bushel out of this land? You're right. You have a big area. That's very nice. If you're going to use it for your beach party, that's wonderful. But you want to produce produce from it, right? You know how much you're going to have to go back and forth with that plow to get the same amount of produce that you could do it from a small piece of good land? As we said in the old country, time is money, right? Mm-hmm. So that's why people will jump at a good piece of land, because you don't have to put in all that work into it to get the same amount of produce. That's why they jump at it.
Okay, that explains it. That's good.
Okay.
It explains. What bothered me was the word native. I didn't know what does good land mean. Like, why is a piece of land good? So specifically, we're talking about farmland, and that's a good explanation for why the smaller the patch of land, the better, as it were.
Right. Right.
Or the easier it is, whatever. It doesn't have to be smaller, but the easier it is to work.
No, yeah, because produce per time is much less in a good piece of land. That's why people jump at it.
Right.
You know what I mean? Not that you can't produce from a medium and bed, but good piece of land is a piece of cake, as they used to say in the old country, right? Okay, so that's what he does. Excuse me. I have this cough and I've taken antibiotics, but after antibiotics, it sort of lingers on, and hopefully before it goes. Okay. Now, what we'll do is conclude here, okay, just for today's class. I don't keep that much, but, I would keep it, doesn't matter. I love it, but I just want to show you now the next level called the Rishonim. Okay? Now, the Gemara, the people of the Gemara are called Amoraim. So very broadly, in up to around 200 from the beginning of the Goyish calendar, 0 to 200 is the time of the Tanaim, and then you have the period of the Amoraim for another 200 years, and it ends with Ravina and Ravashi, who compile the Talmud as we have it today. Okay. Excuse me. Now this Talmud is learned. The schools in Iraq, in the great yeshivas in Bavel continue. I think till around 800, and then a lot of the big people move to North Africa and Germany and France in those areas. That's where basically the people, the Jews, gravitated, and the learning gravitated over there too. So in that period of time, the 1100s, you have what we the end of 1100, the end of 1000, or the beginning of 1100, you have what's the period of the Rishonim. Okay, now there's two types of Rishonim here, and some of them focus more on explaining the Gemara, and others focus more on explaining the halacha of the Gemara, the final result. Okay, so you have, for instance, Rashi goes down the page and he'll explain to you, every line after line. Whenever there's a problem, he'll be talking on the Gemara as it runs. Tosfos will also be doing the same thing, except he'll be talking about how this Gemara interacts with other Gemaras. Okay, and those are called Meforshim. Those are the Rishonim that explain. And again, broad strokes, because Rashi can say a halach, and Rabbeinu Tam can say a halach, but basically they're involved in the inner workings of the Gemara, and the halach is something that you understand when you know how to learn, and you know how to you see the dynamics of the learning process, and you know what the halach is at the end. The poskim really much more in the Sephardic school, and they concentrated on what we do. Okay, they felt that the people were losing the ability to understand the Gemara well, and they better write down the final conclusion. So as we said last time, the Rif does the least of anyone. All he does is he cuts out the debates in the Gemara and brings the conclusions. Okay, the least as far as writing a Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, sort of. The Rambam does a radical reorganization of the whole pie and reorganize everything to the Mishnah Torah, and we lose, when we read the Rambam, the relationship between what he says and what the Gemara and the Mishnah says, because he reorganizes all the material. He takes a radical step. The Ramah, I don't know where he holds in this position. I have to just look it up. But the Rush is sort of in the middle. The Rush really uses these great Rishonim that are before him, the Rambam, the Rif, and he integrates what they say with the Gemara, and then he also comes to conclusions, but more through an integration of their psak with the Gemara itself. That's where he's holding. So let's investigate just their conclusions, okay? Their conclusions. Now, again, we're going to do all this carefully, don't think not. But I always like to show where we're going and what's being done, and then we can go into detail. I'd like to show the whole flow, and then we can go into detail. So let's just see what these Rishonim said. Okay, here are all Rishonim, by the way, we have to go into, but it's going to take time, but it doesn't matter. It's a learning process. Oops. Let me get down to it. See, again, all the stuff has to be, linked properly. It's all technical work that has to be done. I'm going to go all the way down here. I should think that it's a lot of action. Whoops. Here we go. But actually, I made a leak. Oops. So we had this great little index, which Mesa Sasha, I should be able to go here. Here it is. Okay. Here's 4 Rishonim that tell us what the halacha is. Where do they get the information from? From the text that we just read. There's no new information. It's either Reb Papa, who says that who says that Meitav and Kesef you give Lechatchila. If you don't have it, then you can give Shavah Kesef. Excuse me, that's not true. It's either Rev Papa, which says you can use everything except Beinus and Zibris land because you won't be able to get your money back very quickly, or Rav Huna, who says you can use Kesev and Shavik Kesev, and Kesev and Meitav, and if you don't have it, B'diavad, you can use Shavik Kesev. So here I just very quickly, without reading all those words, which we have to do eventually, but the Rif pesaks like Rev Papa, and the way he understands Rev Papa is that Kesev and Subin, as we said, Kesev and Subin, are equal because you can, Subin, if you want, you can go down the street and sell it. So it's convertible into Kesev. The only thing that's equal to Subin is Meitav because people will jump at it. So again, you, the person who were the victim, will be able to get your money back. So he says, the Rif, I understand Rav Papa to say that you can give Kesev, Shavik Kesev, or Meitav. And the only thing you can never give is Beinus and Zibris. Okay? Medium and bad land. Okay? And he says that's how he learned Rav Papa. Rabbeinu Tam brings this as a halacha, which I said, he doesn't have to not bring it. He does bring the halacha. And he says simply that the halacha is like Rav Huna. Why? Rav Huna told us that if you have Meitav and Kesev, you must give it. And only if you don't have it, can you give Subin. Clear? Are we together?
Yeah.
Rav Papa said, Subin is great because you can always get your money back. Just go down the street. But since land is difficult to sell, so the Torah said, give the best so that you'll attract buyers, and that'll be equivalent to the Subin or the Kesef because you'll get your money back. So you had to up the desirability by giving the best. Rav Huna said, no way. The only thing you can give is Kesev and Meitav. And if you don't have, then you can give all the junk, including Bein and the Zibris, all the junk, no problem. But that's only B'diavad. Now we have the Rambam in the Mishnah Torah. And he says a surprise, which is going to be the work of many, many people of the Achronim to explain this Rambam. The Rambam says you can give Kesev or Subin, and only if you don't have Kesev and Subin can you give Meitav. A surprise.
Yeah, it is a bit weird.
Where did he get that from? You see? And again, the Rambam, we have to read the Rambam. The other people are on the page. The Rif is on the page. The Rabbeinu Tam is on the page. So we know exactly where it is that they're bringing their conclusions from. But the Rambam in Torah writes a new compendium of law. Of course, he's building it on his learning. No one's saying no, that's for sure. But we don't know where he gets it from. And it doesn't seem to be Agamara. So this, of course, is where the post-Rambam people are going to have to talk. You see? Now you see what just to help my eyes. You understand what I'm showing you now? What I'm trying to show is why people comment. You see? It's not like you just read everybody and it's a big balagan and this one says this and this one says that, and afterwards you get happy because you yelled and screamed and he yelled and screamed. No. There's a very scientific reason why people must talk. And it's something that once you see it, you have to talk also. 2 and 2 is not equaling 4. Now, the Ramah goes a further step. He's also a Rishon. And he says that if you have all 3 of them, you must give Kesev first. If you don't have Kesev, then you give Subin. And if you don't have Subin, then you give Meitav. He's even more radical than the Rambam. So if you thought the Rambam had problems, the Ramah pushes it a step further. Okay?
Can I ask you something?
Yes.
I know the question is premature. I know it, but I want to ask it anyway. But given that they all have the same Gemara in front of them,
yes.
So where, first of all, I'm confused. I mean, you would think that the last word in the Gemara is the last word, metaphorically speaking.
Right.
So, you would think that, what was it, Rav Papa is the last word, right?
Actually, as ages ago, Rav Huna is the last word.
Oh, Rav Huna is the last word.
In the first set of 4 answers, Rav Papa is the last word. Then there's this interlude, right. And then there's Rav Huna.
So you would think that the next stage of development in Jewish law would be just Rabbeinu Tam, and that's it.
That's right.
Because that's just, so then where do I know you can't show me in detail, but where do the other opinions come from? Obviously not from the Gemara page by itself.
You're a natural, what can I tell you? You're asking, no, you're asking the questions. Either I'm a great teacher or you're a great student, one or the other, but no, you're asking the right question. 2 and 2 is not making 4, right? Right. Excellent question. So I'm going to tell you again on one foot, just very briefly. Yeah. First of all, we have to learn a little history. Rav Huna, I have his date here. Rav Huna is a very early Amara. That means Rav Huna is in Surah from 257 to 320. Okay, he's called a second generation, very, very early Amara. Rav Papa is at the end of the line. I think there's 5 generations down. Rav Papa is very, very late. He's before Rav Rin and Rav Ashu closed the whole Gemara in the way that we have it. but as far as the Amoraim, he's very late. So the Rif says there's a rule that we always pasak according to the Basroi. The Basroi means the Pasak Halach is always the last generation mentioned. The last generation mentioned between Rev Papa and Rev Huna is who? Rev Papa. So the Rif says the Halach is like Rev Papa. Okay?
And Rabbeinu Tam does not follow that principle?
So the Rush is bothered with Rabbeinu Tam. The Rabbeinu Tam doesn't tell us why the Halach is like Rev Huna. But the Rush says, wait a minute, the Rif has a tremendously powerful argument, right? We have a rule. You always go after the last generation of Pasak. We presume that the last people knew what to do. When we do, that's how we do it. That's the rule. So what could Rabbeinu Tam, how did he Pasak according to Rav Huna? So the Rush gives 2 explanations. What? So the Rush gives...
I'm just thinking,
yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead. Think. Wonderful. I love you to think.
No, I'm just... first of all, that principle of the Rif totally makes sense because the last generation, and I'm assuming that this is a superbly intelligent person we're talking about, is not only incredibly intelligent, but has the benefit of standing on the shoulders of giants before him. And so he has, in other words, he's gone through all the material. And so it makes sense that he should have the last word because he's the last generation. He knows what came before. But my question is, well, wait a minute. Given that
I don't know if I agree with you with that, but I know what you're saying. But I don't know if I agree with you. I think
I'm just saying.
It's it's reasonable to say, but maybe it's just a simple thing that the people in the last generation did something. They did something after all, and therefore what they did is the proper halacha to do. What the people did before, we don't know what it is. It could have been that was a argument and it was rejected or not accepted. But we know the last people who were recorded are the conclusion of what people do. We can't start going back to Shammai's position when it's rejected. We have to go by the final conclusion. Okay, yes. What would you want to say?
Well, but I think. The way I see it, it's a little bit more than that. I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, it was Newton who said that it's a mashal that's often used that the reason I see further is that I'm standing on the shoulders of giants.
Yes, I know. I know that quote.
Right?
Okay,
So
I know
in
that
other words,
quote. But I don't
right, so in
believe
other
it.
words,
I don't believe
oh,
it. That's good for science, but
well,
it's not good for Torah. I don't believe it. Not for Torah.
what I mean, no, but because we have the idea that there's the generation of the generations, right? That we're going down.
Or
So
exactly.
in other words, the only right. So, but what I'm saying is that the benefit of the last generation is simply that he knows what came before him, so he can think his way through what came before, and that's why it makes sense that the psak would be according to him. But here's my question: even given that, I mean, that makes some sense to me if that's really the case.
Yeah.
But even given that, the page of Gemara,
Mm-hmm.
if it puts Rav Huna at the end of the argument, so my question is, wait a minute, why would Rav Ashi and Rav, the redactors of the Gemara,
Ravina and Rav Ashi, yeah.
Ravina Rav Ashi, who know who came first historically, they know Papa is wait a minute, is older, right?
Rav Papa is later. Rav Huna is the earlier generation.
Right. So they know that Rav Huna comes earlier.
Right.
And yet they put Rav Huna as the last word. So that suggests that principle doesn't quite hold.
Fantastic.
In other words, that
you just gave the Russia's teretz. Wow.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Not okay. That's quite remarkable.
I don't know if it's remarkable.
It is remarkable. You just said exactly what the Rush said. Yes.
Okay.
By the fact that Ravina and Rav Ashi put Rav Huna out of order and put him last was a signal to us that was the halacha, because they're the last people.
Right. So in other words, Rav Ashi and Ravina were basically following an internal logic which is timeless. The historical positions is irrelevant. It's really the internal logic that is what is decisive.
Exactly, in this case at least. Right, in this
case,
yes.
And their redaction, right.
Right, beautiful.
Yeah.
I'm very, very happy. I can't believe it. If you read the Rush, word for word is what you said.
Oh, nice, okay.
Okay, now there's other combinations, don't think not. Okay, there's other ways to solve this problem with Rabbeinu Tam, but I'm not going to get into it, okay?
Right.
So again, that's for our deeper study. When we handle the beauty of each stage and we understand the logic of each stage, excuse me, we'll be able to appreciate the beauty of each stage. Okay. So now, without, again, strokes here, okay? And maybe this we're going to stop. So I'm only going to give you an introduction to this because it's chaval to do it quickly. Chaval. The nachlist of it is now going to explain the reasoning behind Rabbeinu Tam and the Ramah and the Rambam. Okay? And the way he's going to do it is by analyzing how they saw the Gemara and what they felt was the values or the pshat in the Shachlevatari and the give and take between the Makshin and the Tartzen. Okay, so very simply, because again, I don't want to shortchange this because it's mamish very beautiful. But very simply, I'm going to show you some of the principles that are involved in the evaluation. Now we skip down 700 years now. We're already 600 years. We're already with the Nachlas David, okay? This is his work. Because he has to explain. All we know is the halacha. And we don't know how they got there. Okay? And now the Rush did help us to explain why the Pesach was that way. But still, how did they understand the Gemara to get to their conclusions? So he's going to make a few observations here that will give us the tools to see how these great Rishonim were analyzing. So I'm only going to take a few of them because, as I said, it's chaval. I said before that there's a tension between svara chitzona and text. Okay? You would think, for instance, that you should work 7 days a week and make money. Comes along the Torah and says, Shabbos you don't work. You would think that you could take ribbis. Why not? It's just another commodity. Comes along the Torah and says no. Okay? So there's always a tension between svara chitzona, what you would have thought without the Torah, and the chiddush, and what the Torah is trying to say. There's always that tension. Sometimes the Torah wins, sometimes svara wins, and we're going to see that. But that tension is very, very important. So here, this is an analyzation of Abaya's problem. Okay. First of all, we start with the presumption that kesef is equal to meitav. Okay? Presumption. We have another presumption that subin should be equal to kesef. Now, the fact that kesef should be equal to meitav is a presumption, which again depends upon how you're learning money. If money is what we want, because after all, the animal was destroyed and you want to get a new animal, and the best way to get that is with money. So money's the best, okay? If meitav is going to produce money very quickly, so then in that aspect, it's the best. But we have another problem. Where did we learn that you can use shava kesef? From the pasuk that talked about kesef, right? It said Yashiv l'Rabba shava kesef kesef. Now, when the Torah makes what's called a ribui, when it tells us not only kesef is good, but shava kesef is good, what's the relationship between the stated case of kesef and the case that was nidrash, was learned? So, simply speaking, it should be an equality. The Torah said kesef or subin, either one. Okay. Now, if you hold those premises, then you're going to end up that subin should be equal to meitav. Why? Because if kesef is equal to meitav and svara, and the ribui made subin equal to kesef, that's called a syllogism, right? Subin has to be equal to meitav. Is that correct? Is the logic correct?
Well,
What?
it's called it's just by what they call the law of transitivity, right?
Exactly. So this is called the classical hekesh. Classical hekesh, right? The middle term drops and the two different terms. In other words, kesef is equal to meitav and subin is equal to kesef, so subin has to be equal to meitav. That's called a raya mitzad hekesh. Okay. Mm-hmm. However, that's very good. That's the logical result of a syllogism, but that runs against what we would think in svara, because we said that if subin is good, so then, we would think, that if meitav is good, then Baininus and Zibris is no good, and therefore subin is no good. Because again, translation, and this is a very important rule also, you have to translate the terms. What do they mean? Okay. So by the Torah saying meitav, it wants you to what? To give the best of your land. We don't know why. There's 5 different reasons why. Okay. But Abaya says, wait a minute, if it wants meitav, and it tells you can't have Baininus and Ziberis, it doesn't want those lower qualities, how come it said you can give subin, which means that you can give something that has value? Doesn't Baininus and Ziberis have value? So it looks like that subin should end up being less than meitav. It looks like, according to simple reasoning, subin is not meitav. It looks like meitav is the best of your land. You can't give medium and worse land, and certainly you shouldn't be able to give subin either because it's not called good. Again, we have to discuss which factor makes it good. Okay, so anyway, again, this is only a very, very brief explanation. Comes along, we have two, in this tension, which I'm going to really have to go over again because it's chaval. In this tension between logic and what we call svara, one of them has to give. Either we're going to have to change one of our premises, or we're going to have to change what we think is what we call svara chitzona, common sense, okay, by redefining something. So Rav Papa did a redefinition of what's called good. And he says, in relationship to how you sell something, so Subin is called Meitav, because they both can sell very quickly. Rav Huna has the same problem, but he changes the logic. He changes the premise. He says it's true that Kesef is equal to Meitav, but you know something? Subin is less than Kesef. And what is he, in order to do that, what does he have to say? He has to say a ribui can be less than the stated case. In other words, it said Kesef, Yoshiv L'Ba'alav, Kesef, and even Shava Kesef. And he's going to have to say that when the Torah makes a ribui and includes another case, it can be less than the stated case. Are you with me?
Yeah, I understand.
So he has to break this.
On the whole picture.
Yeah. What? Okay, so Chabal.
No, it's okay. Keep going.
Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
so then the logic will come out, the syllogism, by changing the premise. And once he changed the premise, he can keep the logic, and he can just say that the syllogism was wrong. Now, again, Chaval to do this quickly. It's not, doesn't do justice to it. But all I wanted to bring out here is that when you have a contradiction, something has to give, correct?
Right.
Either the sun will continue going around the earth, and you're going to have to say there's something called an epicycle, which is called a teretz dachuk, right? That Mars is unusual, goes through epicycles, or you're going to have to change the sun going around the earth and say the earth really goes around the sun, and then you can easily explain the anomaly of Mars. But something has to give. Whenever there's a contradiction, something has to give. So too, in this analysis that we're going to go through, Abaya is forcing us to change something. Now the question is, what are you going to change? Okay, so we're going to have 5 different ways of changing either the relationship of Subin and Meitav and Svara, or this syllogism, and that's really what the work is going to be. Okay, so that's it. So that's a lot. I mean, that's the end of our brief, it's not brief. I mean, I want to spend one class in this because it's worthwhile seeing it more clearly than I just said it. I just said it very quickly. But this is a classic case of learning where all the premises are known. You see, it's not a question of, well, what do they talk? It's the premises are known. And we're going to have to change something. And that means in a certain aspect, we're going to have to look at something differently. Now, the question is, what's going to give? Now, this happens all over, by the way. This is not, here's just, as I say, it's a demonstration. But no matter where you learn in the Gemara, whenever kasha is going to be asked, there's going to be a tension between the kasha, and that kasha is going to now change something. The learning is to clearly identify what the factors are and what changed. That's where we're holding. That's what we're holding. If we do that, then we know what's at stake, and we're learning very, very at a very conscious level, and that's the name of the game. If we can get to that place, we're happy people. Okay, we really understand the message. Okay, and that's the learning process. Okay.
This chart here is the way that the Rishonim understand this Gemara, right? That's the
okay. I went much too fast. The Rishonim only give us halachas. This chart is the Nachlas David explaining on what basis how they came to their conclusions. All we know is their conclusions. We have 5 different conclusions. We don't know on what basis they got there. He's filling in on the basis that they came to their conclusions.
I see.
Okay, that's what's so beautiful. Yes.
So the Nachlas David, he connects the Gemara to the Rishonim. He basically
100%. Yes.
it's the missing link. It's the missing link.
It's the missing link. And that missing link you're forced to talk about. You understand?
Yeah.
They knew what they were talking about. They're not people who are just, 5 million lines of code will say something here, will say something here. They were clear about what they were saying, and they knew why they said what they were saying. But we, the later generations, don't understand what they were saying. When we read the Gemara, it doesn't seem that it's the same Gemara that they had. Well, sometimes a little bit, yes, it was, but sometimes it's big surprises, like the Rambam, who's going to say that,
I guess they assumed that, it's interesting, they just give us the conclusions, right, especially the halachists.
Right.
So they assume that that if we have the conclusion, on the one hand, we have their conclusion in our hands,
Yes.
and we have the Gemara, so we should be able to piece their argument, their thinking
That's correct.
together.
Because that's what they did. That's what they did, didn't they?
Right, but they
No one here is dreaming. They didn't think they're not dealing with children
Right.
at their
Okay.
level. You know what I mean? They're nuclear scientists, and these kids don't know how to do addition. Well, I didn't make a class for children. I'm sorry. You know what I mean? When you get to the level of being a nuclear scientist, then we'll discuss, different difficulties and atomic theories and Bohr's questions. But when you're just learning, the times table, but what's the problem? We, in these later generations, are very, very weak in our ability to put those two things together, so we need help. Now, there's no reason why, and it's an imperative that you do it yourself. Okay? But you have to realize that you're playing in a sophisticated game here. I don't like to use the word game here. You're playing with, 5 million codes of Microsoft. I mean, you're playing with very sophisticated people, so that you're going to have to put your head and thinking into it. But the problem is there, and you could put the two things together. Nachlas David says, Bavakasha, please do it. I mean, someone has to do it, don't they? Because these people are asking me questions. How do we get from this halacha from the Gemara that we read? So that's a very, very valid question. So now I'm going to put that together for you. Now, if you can put it together a different way, b'vakasha. A matter of fact, the Vilna Gaon and the Nachlas David argue about how to explain the Rambam.
Oh, wow.
You see? They argue about that.
Nachlas David was the Vilna Gaon's Talmud, or the...
No,
or
he was the
Volozhin?
Talmud of the Talmud. He was the Chaim
Volozhin.
Volozhin. Yeah, he's a Volozhin's Talmud.
Okay.
Yeah. But here, what's beautiful is this is beautiful stuff. I mean, everything's up front. Everything's on the table. People are talking about 2 and 2 are 4. They're not talking about, pardes and mystical things that if you don't have the secret keys, you just don't know what you're talking about. And they're very, very beautifully spelling out the relationship between this halacha and the Gemara that we see. That's 2 and 2 is 4. It's beautiful. That's why I personally enjoy it, because every step of the way is something that you can see. There's no, there's no hidden material here. You have the Gemara, you have the Mishnah, you have the Chumash. Bavakasha, put it together. Please, we'll be happy. We'll be happy if you do. We'll mamish, we'll sing, we'll dance, we'll make you the Rosh Hashiva, anything. We don't care. We just want to understand what the Rishonim, saw when they read this Gemara. That's all. So it's a beautiful, learning process. Just something so beautiful and so attractive and just so wonderful that my words at least can't describe it. But once you start seeing it, you fall in love with it, and it's something that you want to do. It just attracts you. And we haven't gotten to the stage. There's deep levels we're going to see in each stage. You see, each stage is a movement. It's nothing is done. Nothing is done. As I said, mystically here. Everything is done through a logical movement. Now, there'll be a machlokas, how to apply the rules, which rules to apply, what we're going to give up. We're going to give up the sun, we're going to give up Mars. Well, okay, but everybody is upfront about what they're doing. And the question is an evaluation. It's called a judgment call. And what you really learn when you do these types of activities is how to make a Torah judgment call. What goes into making a decision. Okay, so this is where we're holding, and
this is great as usual. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay, have a wonderful week, and I'm just keep going forward in these, trying to again make these charts as easy for us as possible, and together now I think we're ready. After I'd like to spend another class, at least half a class or something, going through this little chart more carefully, because it's very important to see this tension between svara and text all the time. And then we're going to start from the beginning, right from the beginning. And we're going to go step through step. And we're going to see where the moves are and how they're moved and why they're moved. Bezrat Hashem.
I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, be well. Cool, too. Have a great week.
Thank you. Thanks. You too. Sei gesund.